I'm Peter from the Daily Rios.
I'm Eric from Longbox Review, and this is episode 42 of Peter and Eric's Legion Project podcast. Hello and welcome to the Legion Project podcast. I am your host, Eric.
And I'm your host, Peter.
And Peter and I are here. We're back to discuss issue 42 of the third volume of the Legion of Superheroes, where Legion Academy member Laurel Kent stands revealed as a manhunter.
Ooh, we're putting it out there right away.
Yeah, for a
Nice.
40. I don't know, how old is this?
Soon to be 40.
Yeah, but everything old is new again, I'm sure. Well,
Yeah.
it is, because we got manhunters running around in Danger Street as we record this. That
Mhm.
contemporaneous miniseries that DC's putting out. So very timely.
This is the first of a two-parter, Legion of
Yes.
Superheroes 42 and 43. Smack in the middle of the Millennium event with Millennium branding on the cover. So we are definitely in Legion of Superheroes land and larger DC Universe land, which for me is always like, yay, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, and so yeah, when
Right.
they do that, it's always interesting to see how successful they are at doing it. And if you don't mind, I'll just jump to this. I thought it was pretty darn good.
I agree. I agree. I thought I wrote in my notes, this felt like a return to form,
Mm,
not only with Paul Levitt's writing, but I actually feel like Greg LaRocque also did things in this issue that I was like, okay, all right, I'm in looking at the art, reading the story. This feels like one of those issues that is not going to be in our favorites, but it's solid. This is a fairly solid issue, especially based off what we've been talking about. Where we've been kind of up and down for a while, and
yes,
and
exactly.
you know, yeah,
Yeah, and coming off the I know I'm getting on that Starfinger stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Man, this was a breath of fresh air.
Hmm.
And I have to say, all the years of reading um, event tie-in books. Now, of course, we're coming at this. This is the first time I've read this
Okay.
ever. So yeah, cover date of January 1988. So we're, oh God, I can't do the math, but we're close to 40 years ish, right? After the fact,
Hmm.
it's weird coming at it from that perspective because, like I said, I've read so many tie-in event books, and this is maybe one of my favorites ever.
Mm,
For
cool.
which is kind of ironic because the event itself is not that great in my mind. Rereading it as we are
Yeah.
for this discussion. So
Good. Okay. Yeah, we don't have any preamble, so I'm fine if we want to jump right into the synopsis and then do some more
okay,
general thoughts and all that good stuff.
all right. Issue 42, To Sleep 1,000 Years. This is by Paul Levitt's writer, Greg LaRocque penciler, Mike DiCarlo and Arn Starr inkers, John Costanza letterer, Carl Gafford colorist, and Karen Berger editor, with a cover by Steve Lytle. Polar Boy revels in the aftermath that is Starfinger's apparent defeat, and subplot alert mentions to tell us that some Legionnaires have been loaned to the science police to help find the Wanderers who vanished after the Great Darkness. Now, that's a callback. Tellus leaves Polar Boy when he receives a call from Chief Zendak. Tellus then encounters Sunboy and Laurel Kent canoodling after returning from a night out dancing. Laurel excuses herself from seeing Sunboy's molecular motion sculptures and, as Sunboy heads to bed, thinks menacingly, I've waited for this night for so long. Apparently, Sunboy is all light and no heat. Know what I mean? Tellus heads to the Legion gym where Invisible Kid, Shadowless, and Shrinking Violet exercise. Chameleon Boy arrives to collect some equipment for his pal, Colossal Boy. Laurel enters the multi-lab and starts to access some data when Brainiac 5 enters, asking what she's doing in his lab. Element Lad arrives at the hangar deck, asking Chameleon Boy if he wants company to visit Colossal Boy, but Reap refuses. Laurel attacks Brainy, who tries to reason with her before she's able to knock him out. But Tellus, Shadowlass, and Shrinking Violet arrive, demanding to know what is going on. Laurel tells them she doesn't want to harm them, but Violet attacks anyway. Shadowlass uses her powers to help protect the Legionnaires and give them an advantage, but Laurel is able to take what she came for and escape. Later, Brainy uses his own mind to substitute for the damaged computer to determine what Laurel stole. At Medicus 1, Chameleon Boy has arrived and discusses Jim's recovery with his friend. Cam wonders if Starfinger is really dead. Aren't we all? The Legionnaires arrive in the Himalayas, having tracked Laurel there. They easily dispatch the attack androids in the Buddhist temple before confronting Laurel, who reveals, as I did earlier, that she is a manhunter. She's been waiting 1,000 years to accomplish her mission, prevent proto-gods from evolving into immortals, and she needed the data from the Legion's computer to find them. Sunboy tries reasoning with her, but she attacks, causing the temple to explode from within.
Thus ending part 1. Should we continue our general thoughts?
Sure.
Yeah. As I said before, what a great return to form for Levitz and LaRocque and Company. I wrote here, who would think a tie-in book would create such a strong issue? And then I remembered that the Crisis tie-in book also felt a little bit that way, that it was. I just remember enjoying it, right?
Yeah.
And I think Paul Levitz, his approach to having a book like the Legion of Superheroes that is way off in the corner of the DC universe in terms of how it needs to play with continuity, because it really doesn't have to connect to the larger line. And he's said in letter columns already that he has a disdain for working on titles that have to pay attention to other titles, you know. On one hand, it's a super solid issue. Even though I was surprised when I thought about the Crisis, I was like, oh no, this is kind of, you know, that's par for the course for Levitz. I was surprised that it's not exactly, I don't think it's 100% new reader friendly.
Oh,
You
no.
know, I think it's surprising that he's okay with it being steeped in the book's continuity, while he also has to play with the big event du jour. And he's saying, look, I know this is a chapter. I know this is part of the event. Okay, I'm gonna not be so new reader helpful, you know? Figure it out for yourself. But I also don't feel it's that confusing either. Like, you know, if you don't know the characters, that's one thing. But you know, someone who might know some of the DC universe, you know, or even Legion, like maybe they read Legion in Crisis, maybe they read Legion in Legends with Cosmic Boy, you know, or that Superboy crossover. That could be the other thing, you know. He mentioned in a letter column that he knows the title picked up readers because of that Superboy 4-part thing. So, okay, there's that. I have read this before, obviously, when I read it off the shelf. What I liked about this issue, though, in terms of our discussion, is it makes me feel like I don't know if I read those Starfinger issues, and I think I might have said that in our discussion. So there are things in this issue that I was like, oh, now that makes so much more sense based on the way we're doing this podcast. And it's like, oh, that relationship makes more sense. That, you know, especially with Polar Boy and Tellus, and there's some other, even the relationship with Sunboy and Laurel, you know, like, because we saw it in previous issues. So there's a lot that kind of solidified in my head reading this 30 plus year old book. Levitz is back with subplots, some new power explorations,
Yes.
smart choices with who is in the scene and who is saying what to whom in a scene and about a situation. Like this is it's good. Plus it solves the Laurel Kent Superman relationship without having to do a pocket universe.
Hmm. Oh, right. I hadn't even considered that aspect
Hmm.
of Laurel Kent. Yeah.
So when you think in DC event terms, when the head editors send out that memo and says, "Okay, here's our event for this summer. We need one person in your book to be a manhunter." Levitz is like, "I got you. I know exactly who it's going to be."
I want to know that, let's assume that is true. Uh, did he have a list? Was he considering other possibilities here
Hmm.
and how to
Hmm.
weave that in? And oh, I would love to know what that list
Like,
was.
could it have been a Legionnaire, like one of
Yeah.
the Legionnaires, or like,
Yes.
could it have been Quizlet?
If they wanted to like really shake things up, it being a Legionnaire, make it Censor Girl.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we could do two double identities
Oh,
for
that's
her.
right. That's what I'm saying. It's like that.
Yeah,
That would
yeah.
really throw the fandom.
So all to say, I like this issue.
Yes, yes. When I wrote my notes, the first thing I said, I really like this issue.
Yeah.
I felt like it was tight plotting. There was some good characterization. I'm not so. You'll have to explain the art bit to me. I mean, there were some nice things in there, but it just seemed like it was more of the same. But it was, I don't know. It did seem like there was a bit more to it, or like I said, maybe tighter. It just seems like a more cohesive issue
Hmm.
than maybe what we've been seeing before.
Hmm.
And I'd really like to know, what was going on in the months leading up to this, that where things felt so uneven compared to what the result of this one is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get even though it's a departure, a huge departure in the reveal of Laurel Kent, but we get more of her being defined here.
Hmm.
Albeit her being a manhunter, but there is one aspect of her that I found very engaging, and I'm really curious if that's going to carry over into the next issue. So, when we get to that point, I'll talk about that.
Cool.
Yeah, and again, Starfinger. She's not the mustache twirling villain that Starfinger is kind of portrayed as. So I thought of her as the anti Starfinger villain of the month. So
To your question of what was going on and why is this one so tight in terms of the package of it all, I just wonder if it was a chance for Levitz to look at his book, because it very much is his book, and know how to weave this event into it to make the Legion part of it interesting. Because so many of the reasons why tie-ins don't work is because the tie-in aspect feels very forced.
yes,
And a lot of it is because, as we've heard through history, sometimes writers are just jerks and they're like, "Ugh, I don't want to play, I don't want to do a crisis event."
you're
So
messing up my story.
yeah, right. And I mean that would be unheard of today, with how tight editorship is. But so Levitz is like, as he did with the crisis tie-in, he's like, how do I make this help my book? And how can I get the best story? How can my characters swim in this event and look good? And maybe, as I think of post Who is Censor Girl, and because that's like the halfway mark to issue 50, right? The Censor Girl reveal ends in issue 25, 26. All right, so it's the halfway mark to 50. There was a point where Levitz thought that's as far as he was going to go.
Hmm.
you know he was leading up to the Universo project, and we did enjoy a lot of that lead up and some of that story. But maybe he was at a point where he was like, I don't know what else I want to do in my how
Mm,
many years that I've been doing Legion, even prior to this volume. So I feel like that's why we've had rises and falls. We had the Universo project, and we had the Superboy storyline, but there's little issues here and there, and the Starfinger thing that's like, even though he is building to that, but you're like, why? This feels like he didn't. There's very little that he set up for this. A few lines here and there in a previous couple issues. So I feel like he's just like, with this issue, he's like, wow, I can do what I want and
mm.
just go for it. Let me just go for it.
Yeah, how interesting that as you were describing, maybe some writers have felt hamstrung by being involved in this. In fact, I am catching up on some old episodes of A World on Fire, an All-Star Squadron podcast from like a year ago or more, and they talk a lot about um oh my God, I'm blanking on
Roy
the
Thomas.
Roy Thomas. Thank you. I was thinking of the one of the co-host names, and that's all I could think about. Uh, Roy Thomas just, barely playing in that sandbox in those issues because, and that was, I guess, that was the other thing I was hoping maybe you had some history on is in these events, and well, in particular in this one with Millennium, was that you can play along if you want, kind of like the Crisis tie-ins at first were like, or was the company more demanding about, okay, we need sales up on this book, so you tie into this because this will be a big thing, and etc. So um so like I said, Roy didn't care for, well, and there's more to it than that, obviously, with All Star Squad and Roy Thomas, but he didn't really want to play in that area, and probably resented it to some degree. Whereas, as you said, Levitz is just like, this is an open world I get to play with, and he probably felt, I don't know, relieved a bit to be able to do something a little bit different
Right.
while still playing in the 30th century.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, the Millennium. I'll filter in some of my thoughts from the Millennium issues that we're going to talk about too. Millennium was solicited as a multi-chapter story, not only just the 8 issues, but all of the tie-ins together. They're even in the text pages in issue 2 or 3 of Millennium, they mention that it's like a 50 plus chapter event. And what's funny about Legends is when you look at Legends, the way they brand the event with the banner, it almost felt like that's what they thought that was going to be, that it could possibly be, looked at or read as a ongoing chapter, because the branding says like Legend chapter 1, chapter 8, chapter 9. This is different. It's Millennium week 1, week 2, week 3, or week 4. But this one does follow. There is a continuity between the issues. Like you should read certain issues before other issues. And so to your question about, writers participating, it's like you have to, if your book is picked, you have to write about this. You can't just red sky it, and that's it. Give us a Manhunter in your book, do something with it, use it to change up your status quo, be smart about it. That's the fun thing about events. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the only reason that this story the only way it really connects with the Millennium event is because Laurel has one cameo in Millennium issue number 2, I think it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
for 3 panels, or whatever it is. So,
Mm-hmm.
This one really feels more like an epilogue to the event more than anything. Um,
1,000 years in the making.
yeah, right. But I could imagine if somebody was picking this up, they could read it and go, oh, well, it doesn't really mean anything to the actual Millennium story that is going on at the time, unless we read the second part and there's more to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
that I had that same thought. I was like, well, while it's cool, it's a cool concept, and it's a great Legion history alteration and whatnot. Given that it's 1,000 years later, what possibly could it? What connection could it possibly have to what's going on in the 20th century
right,
and the setting of that story?
right.
So yeah, I'm really curious. I cannot wait to read issue 43 to see how this is resolved.
Yeah. I mean, I think for this one, it really is hammering, or it's really playing with the fun of who is the manhunter in your mix, which was
Mm,
really the gimmick. That was the gimmick of this,
yeah.
you know, which of these three characters will betray Superman, right? Who do you trust? Whatever the
Yes.
tagline, it's Secret Invasion for Marvel.
Oh yeah.
It's it's the Changelings in Deep Space Nine. It's all that stuff. That really was the fun of it, I
Yeah.
think. If you want to
I
go on a surface level.
Yeah, I remember because I read the Millennium. I got those issues years ago, all those years ago, as I told Peter a few times. um, but I got rid of them at some point, and I only read it that the miniseries that one time when it was coming out. But I was reading some other comics at that time, not Legion, obviously, uh, and it was when we got to the reveal of you know who was involved with Superman, who was involved with Batman that was a manhunter. Those questions. It's like, oh my God, some of those choices were weird, and some of them were surprising. And I'm kind of regretful that I wasn't reading Legion at that time, and the hype of Millennium and who's going to be the Manhunter in Legion, right? Kind of like who is Sensor Girl,
Hmm.
that whole the mystery of it and trying to figure it out and guess. And so yeah, that would have been I think I would have had more fun maybe with the Legion reveal
Yeah.
at that time. I mean, I have a lot of fun with it now, but even though I have to say I already knew who the Manhunter was because I did buy the back issue many years ago. I've not read the issue, but it's obvious what. And
Yeah.
plus, it's in the ether. So
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the cover. It's on
mhm.
the cover.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, yeah, that could mean one or maybe two things. If no, but you're right. Yeah, exactly.
if you're in the DC now, even if you ignore Millennium, you know it's happening, right? Like we're now three events into DC. They had little trading cards that had all the chapters of Millennium on it that they handed
Oh, yeah,
out.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the ads leading up to it. Here it is, even in this issue, boom, Millennium ad. Like, okay. So if you're looking at the shelf, and then you look at this amazing Steve Lytle cover again, you're like, oh, I guess Laurel is the whoever that character is the Manhunter.
Well, and they put a button on it by having a dialogue cover, which is
Yeah,
rare these days, right? Well, Laurel, are you finally going to tell us your secret?
yeah,
But yeah, yeah, and it's so odd. So yeah, we see just to describe it a little bit, we see Laurel Kent on the right side. She's she's divided in half, so we see half of her human looking or human half, and then the other half is this robotic android like features, and which I love this. I love this. Do the dual uh imagery that they did it with Spider-Man, right? When you'd see Peter Parker half of his face and half of
yeah,
with Spider-Man's mask, right? I mean, we have a long history of comic book imagery using this technique, and it's quite beautiful. What Steve Lytle did here with how he draws Laurel with her eye and the hair, the way she's holding her hand. It's almost demure, and yet there's this a bit of menace
Yeah.
with the robot part of it, right? But even that is kind of cool because you've got all these wires and plates and pieces, and there's even a screwdriver for God's sake, just kind of floating there. So yeah, it's just really cool. And then you got the Legionnaires coming into the room.
I also really enjoy the fact that, okay, like focus on the screwdriver for a second. What, a screwdriver in the 30th
Yeah,
century, right?
yeah, this seems weird, right?
But she's been waiting for 1,000
That's right.
years, right?
Yes.
And like the little patches on her chest, the little extra patches could
Uh-huh.
be her fixing herself for a
Repairs.
thousand
Yeah.
years. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So I actually, when I looked at that, I was like, oh, I don't know if he planned that, but it makes sense on a storytelling level,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and it actually makes me love it even more.
One of the things I put in my notes is I'm jumping ahead, I know, but uh the potential her potential backstory reminds me of what we see a little bit, yeah, a little bit in Legion of Superheroes Millennium
Yeah.
with Rose, right? And so that made me think, well, did Bendis read this?
Oh.
but it's just it made me think about Laurel in a completely different way, which is maybe the good reason why I enjoy this issue so much, because it made me think about a character who basically, really she's been one note for much of her existence in the Legion area. So
Mhm.
what did she, given what we see of her in Millennium number 2, and what we see her, some of the things that she says to the Legionnaires now, 1,000 years later. I mean, she's still doing her mission, which we'll get into. But what has she gone through in those intervening years with what's the Great Disaster, and all that history, right? And to get to this point,
Mhm.
I just that the fact that we don't have that, we didn't even get any of that in
Yeah.
this issue. Maybe there's something in the next issue. God, I hope now, but I doubt it. It's just like all that potential there is just
Yeah.
I found that very um, enticing.
Yeah. When we got to, in my notes, when I got to pages, whatever's on page 7 and 8, I wrote untold story. She's been around for 1,000 years. Doing what?
Exactly. Yes.
And then I did write, what if she was the 1,000 year connection between the present and the future for Bendis' Legion of Superheroes?
Okay.
So maybe not this version of Laurel Kent, but what if it was, what if he did use a Superman descendant as opposed to Rose and Thorn, but
Hmm.
we didn't discover her identity until she got to the 30th century. And she had been living under other identities because she doesn't want anybody to know she's part of the Superman legacy, which they talk about in this issue. And I sort of skimmed her first appearance again, and she also was secretive about who she was, especially to Superboy. Um, there could have been rich potential there for just all kinds of story, even if, if we go into the book a little bit, the things that she says, um, I was playing the part where she says, she was playing the part of being Laurel Kent for the most recent centuries. Makes me think, well, then what were you doing? Who were you before that? Right.
Right.
So, like in the Millennium issue, it says Laurel Kent, right? Like it specifically in one of the captions. I almost wish they would have said the woman who will one day become Laurel Kent, but I
Yeah.
don't know if that would have given it away or whatever. Um, there's there's so many places she could have been in the background in the foot. She's almost like a Vandal Savage character, like just
Mm-hmm.
manipulating things as she goes. Who's to say she didn't kill some people along the way, right?
Well,
Um,
and I mean, hell, forget the time trapper. She could have manipulated things with the Legion.
mhm.
Oh man, it's just the wasted potential.
It's just one of those issues, one of those characters. We've seen it before in this title. We've seen it in many other titles. When you get to write a really good story about a character that nobody cares that much about,
Right?
and then it's like, damn it, I did something so good with her, and now I can't do anything else. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
I was just reading a review of this issue from a website, and someone mentioned they made her so interesting, but we can't keep her around as a villain.
Hmm.
Like that would have been cool, but how do you do that? You don't want to keep bringing up the Superman thing because we're in the Burn era, so. But they could have still done it, they could have done it. And she would have been an interesting character. She would have been an interesting villain. Again, I don't remember what the next issue involves, but clearly we don't see her again. But
Oh yeah. And it just occurred to me how cool of a team up would it have been to have Laurel and Pulsar Stargrave get together and go up against the Legion and
right.
Computo. Just take all of those robotic android type characters and just
Hmm. So let's go into the issue. Let's see, if we want to keep talking about the Laurel stuff. Um, I was wondering what it is she wanted to do, and she kept mentioning about, I need to get into Brainy's multi-lab, I need his computers, I need access to these computers, but then she starts destroying them. So I'm like, okay, you need the computers, but you're destroying them. And it's not until the end until we find out what it exactly is that she wants, and she wants genealogical information. She basically wants to know, to connect it to the Millennium, who could possibly become the immortals that were, prophesized or whatever during the Millennium event. And who are they? Where could they be in the world? Because she is going to kill them. There's more on this earth than you know, even a race of immortals waiting to be born, a birth I was destined to abort. I needed your computers to help me find the likely individuals, legionnaires, but now I need you to know more. Okay, it's fine. That works. I don't think her mission is really the important part, right? It's sort of like, you know, what does it mean to the larger story? What does it mean to the Legionnaires? What does it mean to Legion history, if you want to get that far into it?
mhm.
Um, so that part of it, I was like, okay, okay, fine. Again, to like sort of hit the Millennium aspect of it, I was like, okay, that's totally fine. I don't think Levitz could have come up with anything better or deeper, and I don't think he needed to. Uh, you know, I think that was sort of fine. What do
Yeah.
you think about all that?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I felt it was a little thin,
Yeah.
but again, like you said, and I totally agree. It doesn't need to be anything deep, especially since this is week two, as it says on the cover, Millennium Week Two, and that what was that, an 8-issue miniseries,
Hmm.
right? He can't reveal much of anything about the miniseries itself at this
Right.
point,
Right.
especially,
That's
right?
true. That's a good point.
So he has to keep it's kind of surface level. But it does beg that, well, and maybe that was intentional. What I was originally thinking was, well, then how does this connect to what's going on Millennium? And that made me interested in, okay, as we're rereading this, um, is there some mention in Millennium about Laurel Kent is kind of dropping off or going into hibernation for 500 years, or I don't know, whatever, something to get her off the playing field in the Millennium series, so that her appearance here, the reveal here, it becomes much more important, given that she is this long-standing Legion supporting character.
Hmm.
So yeah, it worked for me. I do question some things, but we have another part to the story, plus whatever, like I said, whatever, if anything, is going on in the Millennium title itself.
Yeah, because again, as we mentioned in issue 2 of Millennium, Yeah, just half a page. Meanwhile, however, in Akron, Ohio, first we see Dan Richards, which is an old Manhunter
Mm,
DC character, or quality, I guess I should say, right? I think,
mm-hmm. I think
uh,
that, yeah.
but there he's just walking the street and walking the other way and coming the other way, unknowing a being called Laurel Kent. If only the humans who were so astounded by the appearances of manhunters knew there were still more of us in hiding. As androids, we can wait 100 years, 1,000 years, if the humans are so helpless, really. So, and that's it. That's she walks by a previous manhunter, a regular human manhunter, and that's it. But there is one thing reading those two Millennium issues was that so the manhunters are in hiding. We learn that they get the reason they can be in hiding is because they managed to grab Harbinger's History of the DC Universe, and they had the entire DC Universe in their hand, and they could place Manhunter agents all throughout history. I'm assuming time is involved in that. Otherwise, how could they? Because if she just wrote the history after the crisis, but yet they can go back and do things like all the citizens of Metropolis right after Superman arrived, okay, I have to get to that part of the story where they reveal that, and I don't remember
Mm,
how
mm-hmm.
that
Oh yeah,
happens.
you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, some sort of time travel aspect has to be involved for all this
right,
to work.
right. So
Yeah.
either her orb went back in time, or they found it and then they were able to go back in time, something like that.
Mm,
But
mm-hmm.
one of the things they mentioned in one of the issues, in issue 2 or 3, is that we've been in hiding. We just needed something we needed something to reveal that we have all these Manhunter agents. And they said, oh, it's because these two guardians, the Guardian and the Zamaron, came to Earth with this Millennium Project. Oh, you're going to do that? Oh, no, you ain't. And then that's when they hit the trigger on, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
seeing Laurel in that Millennium issue, while the event is, like you said, the event is still going on, so there's no outcome yet. It's almost like that crisis thing with the Legion. It's how do you talk about crisis in the future while it's happening in the present?
Yes.
It's historical to them, but it also has to happen in real time. We're kind of getting that thing with Laurel as well.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know
Yeah, and I did have that question of, why now?
yeah,
What about that specific point in time uh activated Laurel to do this in this
right,
issue? So, and that's not, I mean, and maybe I mean, ultimately it really doesn't matter because it's, she's just determined now is the good time and do it, and here we are. So
right,
it's, I mean, the whole genealogical thing is really just kind of a MacGuffin of the
yeah,
story.
yeah.
So,
Maybe it's because she finally started dating Sunboy, right? And then she starts getting unfettered access to the headquarters. I don't know, or it's just DC editorial said now's the time.
now it's, yeah,
Now's the time. I don't know if in part 2 do we get. I don't think we get the reason why she was
anymore. Yeah,
triggered. Yeah, I just don't remember. So,
yeah.
but that is a minor question I have as well. Yeah.
Speaking of her appearance in Millennium Number 2, I really keyed on what she said about humans being so helpless.
Mm,
Given what she says to the Legionnaires, um, in this issue, you read this too. She's like, "You are superfluous and mortal as well." And Legionnaires are certainly not helpless,
right.
but it's again, that kind of plays into the whole idea of what is Laurel Kent gone through in these 1,000 years. Oh, and I'll just, I mentioned this earlier, but I'll just jump to it. She seems concerned for them when she's first confronted. She doesn't want to hurt Brainiac. She doesn't want to hurt the other Legionnaires, but she has a mission to accomplish, and so she does what she has to in order to stall them or escape. Uh, the way that the way that LaRoque draws her at times there is some, like on page 11 in the middle there, the way her facial expression, she looks very concerned, like she's going to have to do something she doesn't want to do. And I think there's a little bit of that later in the issue as well. And so I found that even though she's like, okay, I'm going to kill you now. You it comes across more to me like, well, you forced me into it.
Hmm.
You should have left it alone, and everything would have been just fine. So I that whole aspect of how she perceives humans, and it seems quite clear to me that she's developed, Sunboy aside, she's developed a fondness for these people that she's been associated with for, in real time for decades, but for some number of years. She even she kind of tosses it off, but she makes a comment about being Tellus's Legion Academy co-member.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, she did make those human connections, and so that the whole idea of her describing them as something other than herself, and yet she's immersed in them. I just find that whole idea just really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if that plays out in part two. Does any of that
Yeah.
come through her programming?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I just don't know, and we don't know because we don't do that here. We focus just on one issue because that helps us with our discussion too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did Levitz either we're trying to outthink Levitz or maybe he missed some potential. We'll get there for part two, and it just adds to go back to that whole 1,000-year thing where she's talking about it pleased me to pretend in recent centuries to be a descendant of Superman. A touch of his blood did much to explain an odd power hastily revealed, or a youthfulness that defied decades. And using his name and others, that's the part I love, I have waited until now. I love the blood thing because it's like most people know that her only power is invulnerability, but maybe were there story. I mean, there's not a lot of Laurel Kent stories between her first appearance and now. But if there's any discrepancies, that's what she's saying there. Well, like I have Superman's blood. I could do anything. You just don't know when and how it manifests, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or she's talking about it within all of the centuries that she's been around. Because I love that line that Brainiac 5 has when they're flying to the confrontation with her. And, he talks about the research that she was looking for. And he says, it's an odd subject, one I was only programmed for as a result of a coincidence, a search of descendants of Superman I began after we first met Laurel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Element Lad says, you never found evidence she was, did you? Nothing conclusive, but then all tracks back to Superman through history have proved elusive, even before the time trappers' efforts. And even Computo, I love what Computo says on page 7, where she's walking the corridors and he's like, oh, who's that? Oh, it's Laurel Kent. No problem. She's used to be part of the Legion Academy. Purported descendant of Kal-El. Not descendant of Kal-El.
Mm-hmm.
Purported descendant of Kal-El, right? Of Krypton. Love that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And what Brainy says later, that just, it's all cohesive, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
of course, Computo would say that because that's what Brainy has put in the databanks.
Right. But this idea that, she uses a touch of Kryptonian blood to explain her power whenever it needed to show up probably means prior to Legion. So
Mm-hmm.
she had a life as a super. She had to create records for herself, and she had a few records here and identities. And oh, you have heat vision. Oh well, this week I do because I need it because I need to get somewhere, right? And this week she has, she can fly because she don't have a flight ring yet, but for the Legion, she just has invulnerability. That's enough, So yeah, it's a smart way. I just think Levitz looking at it sure, there's a ton of potential, but we could sit here and talk about that forever. But for what's in the book, that's fun. You know, you're giving this very nebulous character, um, created by, who created her? Mike Grell designed her, and I forget who wrote. It was Jim Shooter. Sorry, Jim Shooter. So Jim Shooter and Mike Grell from Superboy 217 in 1976. So just interesting. Just an interesting balance.
You mentioned that you went back and looked at that issue, right?
Yeah.
Or that story in that issue, right? I did too, and as, you know, you have to. I think you have to play a little bit of mental gymnastics to try and square this out with what
Sure.
we know now. But you know,
Sure.
it still kind of works. You know, if you look at it a little side-eyed, like,
Yeah, because she shows up out of nowhere while Superboy arrives.
uh-huh,
She just happens to be in a place that he's going to rescue her and then have a chance meeting. So like,
mm-hmm,
you know, it works. And then she also is trying to she works her way into the Legion, and again he thinks she's attacking the Legion, but it's all part of like a training thing or whatever. And she gets enough she first of all, she looks like Lois Lane.
mm-hmm.
So of course that's going to attract super. It does in a creepy way, right? Until he learns that she's a descendant. It's like, oh, that's weird. That's weird. Um, but there is an oddity to her first appearance. They're trying to make it just into this love story, or you know, she's from the future. We're gonna make her a Superman descendant. That's cool, or Superman, yeah, descendant. So that's cool. Um, and then you put it in the context of the Millennium, and you're like, yeah, that's kind of weird. That's a little weird. And then she becomes a member of the Academy. Why? Oh, I got to get close to the multi-lab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's think this through, because okay, if your whole point is to get to the multi-lab, what's the easiest thing to do? Well, okay, well, hold on, hold that thought, because it's very she very easily gets in there.
I know. And she probably didn't even need to date Sunboy to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that comes back to my, you know, why now question earlier. But
Yeah.
what I was going to say was it would have been much easier for her to be able to join the Legion by having a power set that would actually get her in there, instead of going through taking this circuit long way around through the academy and not getting anywhere because she has invulnerability as her one power.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it doesn't all quite work, but it's still fun to ponder.
Yeah. But it does speak to the Manhunter thing. Where's the
Mm,
best place to hide?
that is true.
Sometimes in
Good
plain
point.
sight,
Yep. Yeah.
right
Just
in the mix of
what
things.
and yeah, if they play up, because they I don't think they have enough in this issue. If they play up the whole aspect of she had to wait for this point in time, then yes, that makes total sense.
Hmm.
Join the academy, you know, get close to people, become, you know, a cousin to the Legion, so to speak, so
Hmm.
that they never question you.
Of
And
course.
then that whole what annual number
Annual
was
number
that?
one, who shot
Annual,
Laurel Kent?
exactly. Having that happen, she took total advantage of that,
Hmm.
and, you know, endeared herself maybe a little bit more with some Legionnaires. And so yeah, yeah, this is this is a work of genius on Levis's part, or it has just been this huge, wonderful happenstance.
Yeah. And he's just really good about taking advantage of that. He's done
Mm,
it before,
mm-hmm.
where he just takes advantage of a situation and makes it work for the book that he's been writing for a very long time. And I do. I just really like this issue. Like, I'm gonna jump a little bit here. Let's go to the first scene between Polar Boy and Tellus.
Mm,
They've had a. It's great that first of all, it's great that he's using Tellus a lot in this issue. We haven't seen Tellus too much here and there,
mm-hmm.
but it also plays on their relationship because they both joined the Legion at the same time. And the five of them have some kind of affinity for each other, even though we don't see it too often, but every now and then we do.
Right.
And I thought that was a just a great, you know, use of characterization. It's exposition about what happened in the previous issue, which is something that, as I mentioned, didn't really kind of make sense to me when I read it way back then because maybe I didn't read those Starfinger issues, but I was like, what's he talking about? Cleaning up Starfinger? Oh, okay. All right. And then it's like, oh, now I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But I also understand that these two characters talking with each other also means something because, like I said, they joined at the same time. So they
Yeah.
have a relationship.
Well, and that relationship is interesting because we when Tellus leaves the room, we get this inner monologue, him thinking about Polar Boy, and we get this really interesting um, assessment of the Legion leader here from Tellus, which quite possibly is the most observant thing he's revealed to us as readers. Not necessarily about Polar Boy, but just we don't see him contemplating like this. So this I thought that was interesting. But what he does say about Polar Boy, um, of all humans I've encountered, he is the one most entranced with the aura of his own persona. I don't know that I buy that, given that Wildfire is on
Or
and
Sun Boy.
Brainiac 5 or Sun
Sun
Boy. Yeah,
Boy. Yeah.
exactly. Uh,
Yeah.
but he does follow up. So I think Levitz is he's throwing a punch out there, a little jab, but then he softens it by having Tellus ponder. I wonder if that is part of what makes him an effective leader of humans.
Yeah.
So that I thought that was nice, a nice progression of, I don't know about this guy, but it's probably okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talk about leadership and it feels like this is a win for Polar Boy. The Starfinger thing actually managed to be a win for him. In the way that we talked about, the Universo project was a total loss for Element Lad. Like that was such a he
Mm,
went out on a bad mission. So it's characterization stuff that I really kind of enjoyed. And he Tellus comes off well in throughout the whole issue. I mean, he's the one that when they go to the monk the temple, he's like, they're not real. That's why you have Tellus on the team. That's why you have Saturn Girl on the team. And so he manages to warn them about that, which is great. The gym scene is cute. Where he's jumping in the water and he's that whole gym scene was just sort of silly and fun, but and kind of pointless, but also not because
yeah.
it showed the camaraderie. We're gonna see those characters later. Um, it shows the Legion as a living, breathing thing. People, it's late at night, yet there's people in the gym. Uh, it's fun to see them on their downtime, especially after like a two-parter with Starfinger and all that other stuff. So yeah, like I enjoyed Tellus's presence in this issue.
Mm-hmm. They also play up the fact that he's a telekinetic,
Hmm.
which is not something that they've really done a whole lot with regarding him. So it's usually focused on his telepathy and his otherness. So I like that too.
Do you want to pick a scene or something you want to talk? Like I said, I was just sort of bouncing around.
Well, so that scene where that I mentioned in the synopsis with Sun Boy, when we first see Laurel in the issue, and I a couple things about this. Sun Boy goes off to his room and she's left there. Um, she says, "I thought the dialogue was weird, but I like the panels showing this. We get her thinking what she's thinking, and then this quick abrupt turn to see her face close up. That's a real effective, I think, uh, dramatic moment
Hmm.
for the character, right? But I was curious. Like I said, the dialogue is kind of weird. She thinks to herself, "Night, sorry anyway, but not as sorry as you'll be."
Not as sorry as you'll be. sorry that she didn't go into his room with him. You know, probably also,
You think?
yeah, because he wanted her to. I think he almost expected. That's why they're back at the headquarters, right? And then she's
Right,
like,
right.
no, and then he's like, all right, I'll call you a cab instead of taking her home, which is perfect for some boy. He's such a whatever. And then I think that goes back to your thing of like there's still Laurel in her, right? And she's like, night, sorry, anyway. And but then this is one of the three. I actually liked what LaRoque did with these panels too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but not as sorry as you'll be, as you'll be. I've waited for this night. I mean, it's that's the switch, right?
Yeah,
Like this
yeah,
is it just it triggered.
yeah.
So you spit out that classic villain dialogue because that's now what she's got to be.
Yeah, it just yeah, that I just love that scene. She's so she appears to be enjoying herself with Sunboy, and she's smiling and playful. And then that we get that turn. So that I
Yeah,
thought that was a great way to get her into the story in this
yeah.
issue.
I also like the artwork on page 7, the panels, the tight panels of her walking the corridors. Is the multi-lab really that impressive and awesome? Maybe not. I feel like LaRoque's tech feels a little outdated for the 30th century. But I'm okay with it. Like I think it works, and he on page 8 hints that she also has because the Manhunters are robots. Like we don't know at this point. Is she a robot? Is she a human? Is she a sleeper agent? Like, well, she is a sleeper agent, but is she a human sleeper agent?
Mm-hmm.
Is she a robot? We'll
Mm.
find out next issue. So that reflection on her face of all the technology, and then he reverses it and puts her reflection on
Yes.
the thing of that's great. That's
I love that.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. And to me that, that did we get anything in the dialogue before that?
There's also the pan. There's also the panel with like in her pupils and her
Oh
iris,
yeah.
the
Hmm.
little computer
Yeah,
thing.
just
Yeah.
to me that, that is clearly visual language saying that she is, robotic.
Right.
So yeah, that was, I had that in my notes too. That was a lovely, that reflection. Yeah. Is she, well, the very first panel is, the reflection of, mm, I guess, data on her face, which is kind of weird. uh it's a very bright monitor, I guess. But anyway, but she's human, she looks human. And then the reverse, that mirror image of her as a reflection in the computer. So she's the thing in the machine. She is the machine. So she's
Right.
in the machine. So
Right.
yeah, that I thought that was probably one of the best things that we might have seen from LaRoque.
Yeah. Or even like page 13, the silhouette page, where she's battling the Legionnaires and Brainiac, and they're all confused why. And then I love that Shady is the one is like Brainiac 5, the child has obviously gone mad. She is no longer a child, Brainiac, nor an ally. Something has touched her soul with evil, and she deserves only darkness. Great moment for Shady. It's
Mm-hmm.
small, doesn't mean anything in the larger run, but that's my girl.
Yeah, yeah, very
Um,
melodramatic though.
yeah, well, it's the Legion, of course. But the next page, the silhouette page, is again, is it at the fullest potential an artist can take it? Maybe not.
No.
But I kind of dug it, and I really dug the bottom panels where she's crouching and then explodes off, and
Yeah.
then you see her in light, and then she flies away. Like that's a good sequence for
Yes.
LaRoque. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
gotta
I
give him his props because when he deserves them,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I will, I'll be honest. And I thought, well, this was an easy day for him, this page. But it works for the reason that you stated. Yes, yeah, that was good.
yeah.
I thought maybe when you mentioned earlier that about the uh, expanded use of powers, or I can't remember exactly how you put it. I wondered if this scene is what you were talking about.
Well, she shows strength, right? But that could just be because she's a manhunter, as
Were,
opposed to
were you referring to Laurel Kent or some other
no,
character? Oh,
another
okay.
character.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm assuming you. you had the same notion. And to go back to what you said about her having connections to her life and the Legionnaires when she does fly away, page 15, and so ends the life of Laurel Kent, a shame. This has been a remarkably convenient identity. I wonder if Superman's disguise served his secret as well. It's so hard to recall. Love that.
The weight of years on even an android.
Yeah.
I yeah, see that's that it was this kind of stuff is like, oh my God, he's giving us just these little again, little nuggets. I realize I keep saying that phrase every once in a while when it comes to Levitt's storytelling and
Mm-hmm.
his characterizations, but this is exactly why I say that all the time. It's just like, oh my God, that's there's something here. And it suggests something so much more. It's like he's giving us the tools to tell our own stories in our own heads here that has nothing to do with what's on the page,
Yeah.
the story on the page. So I totally love this.
There's a part of me that makes me wonder, did I like Laurel Kent prior to this issue, or was this the issue that made me like Laurel Kent? I don't know. I don't know if it was the Who Shot Laurel Kent issue. Maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking, wondering about that myself, and it's hard to say because I know I've read some other appearances like in the 200 teens of Superboy and the Legion, and then she made a few appearances in um, later Legion stories,
Hmm.
but she doesn't really have a spotlight until that annual.
Right.
And so that's the most we had been given of her. And so yeah, that I think that kind of just begs the question of, or makes us more interested in the character.
Yeah.
But and then this builds on that because this is the counter to that. So are you saying that you find this Laurel Kent more compelling than what we've seen of her before?
No, I think it's hard to figure out, did I always think of Laurel Kent as the Manhunter, or did I like Laurel Kent and then she became a Manhunter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know quite how it plays out in my comic book reading. When I read that comment about her and how she could have been used as a recurring villain, that to me also speaks like, oh, that's the first time I'm thinking of that. And it's probably why I had such a fondness for Laurel Gand in the 5 years later Legion, because
Mm-hmm.
she's sort of an amalgamation of Supergirl and Laurel and all those other characters. Sense of Girl in a way. So with Laurel Kent, we get Levitz's dip into the actual Millennium event on page 26.
The obligatory
Yeah,
connection.
yeah, and I liked it. It's a good summation of not only the Millennium but the Manhunters as well. It's Levitz acknowledging that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. Um, it's enough information for maybe a Legion reader who wasn't reading Millennium at the time. Maybe they skipped out on it, or maybe they read the first issue and that's all they wanted to read.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I did appreciate that, and also there's the connection of on page 24 where Laurel fires a power and she said, "You shall have nothing but the green beam of power pushing you back." And that's something we learn like throughout Manhunter history, that they were originally imbued with green power. Now they had lost that power. The Guardians took it away from them, but over time they learned they had other power. And is it really all that odd for her to maybe find it again in 1,000 years, especially in a Legionnaire continuity thing where they don't allow Green Lanterns, in the sector or however it goes. So, um, you know, in the future, it always seems like Green Lantern power is just floating around somewhere, waiting for you to take it. So, I liked all that. It was he had to acknowledge it, and it works for me.
Since you're talking about that scene with her using the green beam of power, as she says, it's kind of odd. It hadn't occurred to me until just now looking at this page, but she's using green power, and the Legionnaires are still running under the assumption that she is a descendant of Superman. So Element Lad turns her throne in that Himalayan temple to kryptonite.
Hmm.
And of course, which totally makes sense because one, they all they've known of her is that she's a descendant, supposedly, and two, she was injured previously by a kryptonite bullet.
Hmm.
But it's just the whole green on green thing, the green power, green kryptonite.
Yeah.
It's an odd juxtaposition
Yeah.
in three short panels on one page. So
Yeah.
I had forgotten that the Manhunters had lost that ability, and yet here she is with it. I didn't make that connection. So yeah, presumably along the way she found it
Yeah.
or found something like it. Maybe I don't know.
Plus, it's it kind of nebulous. I mean, there's a recent issue, well, the very first issue of the new Green Lantern title as part of Dawn of DC. I don't know if you read it or not. Features a Manhunter suit, not the actual android, but like a Manhunter suit,
Hmm.
and it wields green energy.
Oh,
So even to this day, they're playing with that notion.
I wonder though, given like you talked about the overview of Millennium on page 26, which I think, if I remember correctly, in Millennium, was it issue one? It took it took more than a page to give this same
Oh,
history.
sure.
So props to Levitz and LaRoque for summarizing it so succinctly. Um, but it made me wonder if you were a Legion reader and you were not involved with the miniseries or Manhunters, generally speaking, and you read this, and we see the Manhunters on this page. They're wielding these guns that were shooting towards a guardian of the universe, and Laurel is wearing the same exact outfit that we see here in this scene. Um, why doesn't she have that same, the gun with the battery, and it just is, it causes me to question why wouldn't we see these things if you were coming into this new. So is that confusing for readers? Does that make you question what's going on here?
Yeah. Because we know that's what they used while they were under the sway of the Guardians, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
eventually it was they had to take them away from them. So
And she said what you had read this, but uh, where was this earlier? She says this, going back to what we've been talking about with her and her history. All the while that battle raged between the Manhunters and the events of Millennium, I slept among mankind. So that could suggest two things. One is she was not active. She was in some sort of slumber, or she was not activated, I guess.
mhm.
But I don't we don't really see that here. Well, there's two. I guess there's two aspects to this whole her activation is whether she was operating this whole 1,000 years as a manhunter, fully aware of her programming, or was she uh, was she unaware at times that she was a manhunter, or it was this particular point in time, again going back to that, that she was activated to fulfill her programming and her mission.
Right, right.
So
I mean,
just
what
just just the language choices are interesting, and trying to parse that out, what that really means is.
yeah. what we see of her in issue 2 of Millennium is that she fully is aware of who she
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
exactly. So,
But that's not to
cup,
say it couldn't have worked another way. Like maybe she did go to sleep. It's like that,
yeah.
and then she just allowed some time to pass. Because Lana Lang was a Manhunter agent, but she didn't know she was a Manhunter. It was only until she was activated
Hmm.
that she knows.
Right.
So, a lot can happen in 1,000 years, just as Mon-El.
Good point. Good point.
He's the sleeper agent.
Go
All right.
to go back to your comment about the Legion of Superheroes movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that would work.
All right. Well, let's talk about some other smaller points for this issue so we can wrap this part of it up.
Hmm.
What do you got?
Um, let's see here. Well, the primary thing that I really liked was the bit with Brainiac 5
Yeah.
and him becoming a Kaluan processing chip for the computer. I thought that was really cool. And speaking of the Legion of Superheroes movie from our previous Tales of the Legion project, um, we see him doing that in the movie, and yet here we are in this
Oh.
precursor 35 years earlier doing something very similar, and yet I'm reading it after I saw the movie. So it's just but I this totally makes sense. This is a really cool aspect of his 12th level intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised if they've done something like this before. I don't remember it, but if they haven't, I'm surprised they didn't do something like this before.
Yeah.
So this is a nice uh, um, addition to his abilities. Besides the fact that he's really smart and he has a force field belt. So
Right.
yeah.
Substituting for whatever computing power is unavailable. This is what I mentioned about Levitt's looking at his characters and using them in a different way. He's done it before with some of the other characters, small thing, and they're very small. They're just like, we're gonna let Dream Girl be able to foretell the actions of her opponent in a fight, and we're gonna whatever else he has done with whichever Legionnaire, about using their powers in a new, slightly different way. And it's like, okay, there you go. That's fun. That's creative. That's why we like to read this. It's almost like they all have these like secondary mutations in a way. Levitz is just trying. If he can't do, he's not going to do anything to change Brainiac 5 on a character level because he's well trotted. Brainiac 5 is Brainiac 5. He's, you can't do that for 1987. This is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been through so many different character things to arrive at this point. Whereas someone like Shrieking Violet is ripe for change
Oh
on a
yes, I see.
grander scale, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
what can you do to Brainiac 5 to make him just a little bit more interesting than he was one issue ago? Oh, this makes perfect sense. Plus he's dealing with a robotic villain,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's smart. It's
And he
smart. That
has
was
he has quite the history with robotic villains,
yeah,
some of whom he's made himself.
yeah, that's for sure. One of the little bits of this issue that made me want to give Levitt a hug again.
Yeah, yeah.
We've criticized him in the past, but this is a good choice.
Well, speaking of criticism, so very minor thing. Since you were just talking about Dream Girl,
Mhm.
why didn't she dream about this? Why didn't she foretell that Laurel was a manhunter?
That's
but
true.
I forgive it. That's
Yeah,
fine.
she does warn Chameleon Boy, or Element Lad warns Chameleon Boy.
Yeah, what? Yeah, that was. I thought that was a bit odd, because we don't really know what the warning was or what it was about. So yeah, that to me that's just a future subplot alert. So
Yeah, right. Dreamy had a premonition about your next mission. Um, it's got to be Starfinger.
oh God,
Yeah,
okay,
it has
that's
to be because he's meeting his best
yeah,
friend in the
right.
hospital. They talk about Starfinger.
Keeping that plot alive. Yeah.
Yeah, he
Ugh.
says, he's dead now, and Cam's like, is he? And it's like, okay. So this is one of those subplots that we get. It's a norm for Paul to do this. It's not overly interesting. I like that there's continuity though. They're
Mhm.
actually paying attention to the busted leg of Colossal Boy. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I love the fact that they emphasize a couple times in this issue. First, I think in the gym scene, and then later when they're together, just that connection that they have because they join the Legion at the same time, which we
Right.
spent significant amount of time discussing in. You have to help me with the issue, Peter. But
Somewhere in right before the Universo project.
was it okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I appreciate that continuity as well, and it's not really something they've actually played up until now. I think it's more, or if they have up to before this, it's been more tell not show, and now
Right.
we get to see a little bit of that interaction. So that's nice. I like that.
Um, was it Legion of Superheroes 39?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so it was after the Superboy. Sorry, my bad.
Oh yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Where the spotlight on Colossal Boy. Yeah.
The other bit in this that I wanted to touch on with you, I was curious what you think about it, is Sunboy. So he, he was dating the enemy, so to speak, right? He was duped, and I think if this were early Jim Shooter writing Legion, he would have been hung out to dry. He would have been expelled from the Legion. All this, all that mean stuff that they used to do, right? And they do touch on it though. And this is on page 16.
16. Yeah.
He's at the beginning of the issue, and then we don't really see him until here. And he comes in after Laurel has escaped with the data. Um, and he says, he comes in, count in another pair of hands, Brenny, especially since I hear this was sort of my fault. And one, I love how he's kind of discounting his culpability
Yeah,
here.
sort of. Such a douche. He's such a douche.
But he's kind of mea culping it a little bit. But what I love about this is how Brenny is like, offer accepted, some boy, but not the apology. Laurel is an academy graduate, and we trusted her. Any of us could have made a mistake, which is pretty magnanimous of, I think, any Legionnaire,
Hmm.
uh, and very emotional for Brainy.
Hmm.
I think we're seeing, the softer side of Brainiac 5, given more recent events. The death of Supergirl, what he's gone through with that, Ron Vidar, the whole Universal project, all that stuff. I think he's really they're subtly changing him as we go on. I'm curious how that's going to progress.
Yeah. It could also be he also feels maybe that he could have
Oh,
stopped this had he
well,
been in his lab.
and that also, he's the smartest guy in the room. Why didn't he put two and two together to
Yeah.
figure this out before? And with that in mind, in that same panel, we've got Dream Girl, as I facetiously mentioned before. But notice the way that her expression.
Oh yeah.
What, how did you interpret that?
She's looking at some boy like, you big douche. Like, yeah, Brainy may think you're okay, but you know, you're a himbo just like we think you are, Like she's
Which
like,
is which is funny coming from her, because she has that reputation on the other side.
she has that reputation, but she's not.
Right? Yeah, of
Whereas
course.
some boy
Yeah.
clearly is.
Well, yes,
He
that is
has
true.
poor characterization skills. Poor, you know, he's not a detective. So
Yeah, I what I was curious though was how you took that. The whole idea that how could he not know that she was, a man, not know that she was a manhunter, given how intimate they were becoming or were, who knows. And yet they Levitz and LaRoque bring it up and then
Hmm.
just kind of shove it under the rug and move
Right.
on.
Right. But still giving Dreamy that little like, she's like rolling her eyes, like, whatever, Brainy, you know.
I just love it. I just thought it
Yeah.
was a great bit of camaraderie with,
Right.
between the characters, and they don't do the stereotypical melodrama of how could you not know, and all this
Yeah.
stuff. So
And Shady does it with Brainy in on page 14, and that's where he brings up that one of the other subplots is that he's working on something
mm-hmm.
and he's been locked away in the med lab or multi lab because of it. But I love the little clue here that he's like, I was away, I was checking notes with Circadia Senius. And it's like, oh, then that means that his project involves time.
Yeah.
So, we get a little bit more information about whatever that is. So Levitt's being very smart about his subplots here.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
throwing a little bit of information.
Yeah. So wait, how many subplots do we have in this issue? We got the Wanderers. We've got this little
Oh my
bit with
God,
Brainy.
we didn't even talk about the Wanderers. That's
Right.
amazing.
Like I said, from the Great Darkness. That was how many years ago?
I know.
Right.
Well, in
And he's
Legion
bringing it.
time, it was probably
Yeah.
like what, 3 months?
Well, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, total mention in the beginning. Like it was weird reading that, like Levitz is giving us that exposition from Polar Boy about the previous storyline. And then he's like, things are so great, I even gave the science police some of my team to go look for the Wanderers. And you're like, who who's been asking about the Wanderers? I mean, maybe the
Mm-hmm.
readers have, but like it hasn't even come up at all in this volume. And then Levitz is like, so I looked and I was like, oh, okay. This book came out in September of 1987. Wanderers #1 comes out in March of 1988, six
Okay.
months
That
away.
I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah, is a total plug for a title that I don't know if they've even announced it at this point yet, but it's
Mm-hmm.
coming soon. So, but what an odd sort of inclusion. I love it because I again, another part of Legion lore that I like for no reason other than they exist as this odd thing, And I haven't even read the Wanderer series yet, and I'm just like, yay, Wanderers, knowing that series is not any good, I'm sure. And that'll be by Doug Munch and Dave Hoover. We're gonna have to read that,
Yeah. Yeah.
when that comes out.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you have those issues.
I do.
Okay.
I actually bought the first few issues of that when it came out,
Oh, okay.
and didn't continue with it, but I've since gotten all the issues.
All right. Yeah, so as far as subplots go, it's now that it's Brainy secret project and whatever, Dream Girl's premonition of Cam and his next mission. Um, and I think that's
And
it so
Starfinger.
far. Yeah, and we'll learn that that's part. I think that's part of it. Yeah.
I had a question for you, Millennium related,
Hmm.
perhaps, because like I said, I don't have the issues, so I can't look this up. Um, so they go to the Himalayas, and this temple.
Hmm.
It does that temple appear in Millennium? I did I read through the issues 1 through 3. Um,
Yeah.
again, looking for something like that, but I didn't see anything. But I don't know if that appears later or
Yeah,
not.
and I can't remember. I don't think it's the temple from first issue special that first presented
Mm.
Marshall as the Manhunter by
Oh,
Kirby.
okay.
I think that's where we got Grandmaster for the first time. So I don't think it's that same temple, but I don't remember.
Okay.
So
I mean, it would
it's
have been nice if there was some connection there.
right, right.
Why go to the Himalayas? Why? I guess because it's secluded.
Yeah.
And is this where? Well, wait, maybe this is where she slept, or she. This was this is Laurel Kent's Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, yeah, in a way.
And then this maybe my final comment. We get yet another issue of the villain blowing up some their base of operations.
Classic ending, right?
Maybe not do it 2 issues in a row. or 3 issues, or yeah, a few issues away.
Wait, did they do the, when did they?
Starfinger blew up his
Oh,
sun orbiting platform.
oh, I forgot about that. You're right. Yeah, but this one is cooler.
It is, yeah.
Okay. And that is our coverage. Legion of Superheroes 42. So we'll have to see how issue 43 pans out, see if some of our questions are answered, see how it wraps up, because I honestly don't remember. So that's going to be fun.
Hmm. We've covered the issue, but there were some responses to this
Hmm.
that I found interesting. Um, so this is from the letter column in issue 46. I just jotted down a few of these reactions, Peter, and I don't know what you have yet, but for these, but Charlie, reader Charlie, thinks the creators defiled Superman's legacy with this reveal, which I found eminently humorous for some reason.
Yeah, that don't make sense because his legacy, there is no Superman legacy anymore post Crisis.
Mm, mm.
We have to get rid of her, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, you have to get rid of her. Even if you make the argument that she could still exist post Crisis or burn Superman because she's a descendant, it doesn't matter.
hmm,
That's not the point. The point to burn Superman was to make him the sole Kryptonian at that point with no legacy from his past. But you can also argue no legacy anywhere. Like anything that had anything to do with Superboy, Superman from pre-crisis, it's got to go.
yeah,
So yeah, that's a silly statement.
and maybe that's what Charlie is really reacting to.
Yeah.
Neil thought the story was more exciting than the Starfinger issues, so Neil had good taste. And Rob liked the characterizations, which we have gone on and on about.
Mhm.
So Ray, Ray commented on Polar Boy's leadership style and was concerned about his depiction, as I was. Um, the way that we talked about how Tellus reacted to Polar Boy in that one scene. So I'm, I feel like that Levitz is stacking the deck against Polar Boy in a way as things are progressing. How he's been doubting himself, how he seems insecure in his role as leader, and then now this thing about being, uh, how I forget how Tellus put it, but thinks highly of himself. I think is
Mhm.
the gist of it, right? So, like I mentioned this before in previous episodes, I don't like how Polar Boy is necessarily being depicted, but it does give us some great characterization, whether I agree with it or not.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know. I get, like I said, that opening scene makes it seem like whether it's valid or not, he thinks very highly of his tenure so far, and I don't think he's done bad so far. You know, he was leader during the time trapper stuff.
right.
You know,
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it's his insecurity that I'm really bumping up against.
yeah. Or his just, I mean, he is young.
Yeah.
Well, well,
Eh, is
yeah.
he
No, he's over
comparatively?
18. Yeah, he's over 18.
Well, that
Eager.
is still young.
Yeah, his eagerness. He
Yeah.
has that. He's
Mm-hmm.
not Element Lad sulking at the mission monitor board. Oh, woe is me. I could be off kissing Siobhan, but I'm miserable because another mission. You know what I mean? He's not that. He's like, I'm Polar Boy. Let's do this. Oh, I messed it up. That's all right. We'll make do the next time around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm okay with his. I also don't know what Levis has in plan. Like
Mm-hmm. Well,
again.
and I'm leery of what he has planned.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then finally, that I wanted to point out with this. So letter writer D, points out that Laurel had been shot, and we talked about this before. So this reveal contradicts that story. Okay, so that's just a lead into this. So in the Legion Companion, which I've not had an opportunity to make use of recently, because there's just not much for the stuff that we have been reading. There's not much
Hmm.
reflected in this Legion Companion, but there was an interview with Paul Levitz, and in this interview, he was asked, "quote How do you shoot a Manhunter robot with a kryptonite bullet?" Paul, I don't know. Interviewer, remember the Millennium Cross? I kind of have to question, did the interviewer not know who he or she was talking to? Remember the Millennium crossover? It sort of contradicted the Laurel Kent storyline. Um, well, you could still get shot by a kryptonite bullet, Paul says, but it did put her in the hospital. Shoot most things with a kryptonite bullet, and it'll end up in the hospital. I'm entirely sure that any thorough rereading of my run will find a variety of contradictions and goofs. But then, in response to Dee's letter, Levitz posits there that she used the green energy, perhaps, to fake her humanity, or chose to be injured, quote unquote, by kryptonite as needed, which I think we touched on a little bit there too. So,
Right.
but I just love that his response in that interview. That was awesome.
Yeah, you can't read 1980s comics with the eye that we read today's comics and expect the same outcome.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing where, you know, yes, you can point out the sexism rampant in 1970s Marvel comics all over the place, and DC, but
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
the specific X-Men issues that I'm reading. Um, um, it's like the warnings in front of cartoons. These were written at a time, and same
Mm-hmm.
thing with Levitz. He's like, yeah, I made mistakes. We've pointed several of them out, inconsistencies and whatever, and dropped storylines and dropped subplots, and that's the nature of writing a team book, an ensemble book, for as many years as he's been writing them. And the difference between having a collaborator like Giffen or Lytle and a workhorse like Greg LaRocque,
Mm-hmm.
a member of the assembly line.
Well, and I will say too, having written many stories when I was younger of my own superhero universe, right? Coming up with plots and characters and situations over a long term, and because I did this for a few years in late junior high, middle school, and early high school, and thinking I was going this way with a story, and then eventually, it just I for whatever reason I went another direction, or I got bored, or I you can't help but make changes along the way, and
Right,
certain things are going to drop out or not be resolved sufficiently.
right,
Uh, let alone for yourself as the writer, but your readers, are going to see those things and wonder about what you're doing. So,
right.
did you have anything else, like reactions to the issue?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Should we talk about? You want to go to Amethyst next,
Well, let's do any
or
lingering
Millennium?
Millennium thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you have
Okay.
anything specific to issues 2 and 3. We try to do so. We're in the segment now where we're looking at where the Legion is connected to the larger DC universe and maybe in other Legion titles. So we're sort of keeping an eye on Millennium, especially because we're in this two-parter. So we read issues 2 and 3, and we already talked about the Laurel appearance in
Mm-hmm.
issue 2. That's really the only Legion connection, larger Legion connection. But were there any thoughts to those issues outside of that?
No. But I will take this opportunity to point out the teaser in this Legion issue for the next issue says, "We'll see what the last of the Manhunter plots will be, the last
Mm,
of their plots." So that's I'm more interested in that aspect than anything that we've mentioned about issue 2 or 3 of Millennium. Although I will say, um, Nancy Reagan as a Manhunter, I thought that was pretty funny.
That's brilliant. Come on. That's brilliant. Right. Because their first impulse is to blame Reagan
Yeah.
or to say that he is. And they're like, no, no. I was like, oh, but Nancy is like,
Yeah.
I don't know if
What,
listeners were alive during the
but
80s. I
that's
was
it.
alive.
Yeah.
She looked like a robot a lot of times. I believe it. I believe it.
I was thinking the same thing of like maybe younger listeners may not they won't understand that
Yeah.
what the whole Reagan thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I also like the other point to that is the continuity between Legends and Millennium,
Yep.
because Reagan was depicted in that miniseries as well, and he makes reference to those events
Hmm.
in Millennium.
Hmm.
So I thought that was really nice.
Yeah. Superman even does it a little bit when all of the various heroes are at the Green Lantern Citadel in issue 2, and they're all like they're hearing the story about what's happening, and then the Guardians are like the pair. They said one of the chosen is going to be Terra and of
Mm.
the Teen Titans, and they're like, she's dead, and there's like, oh. So suddenly everybody, they've been hearing for how many years from Hal Jordan that the Guardians are, all amazing and blah, 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 blah. Yet they don't even know that one of the people that they want is dead. So that
Mm.
creates a lot of doubt. And then Superman steps up and he's like, okay, we are the people that if we're going to do this, we have to do this. But he also, not in a direct acknowledgement to Legends, but in the dialogue, it certainly speaks to um, Legends. Now I think about it, I think it was in issue 1 where he even says like, "Look, we are heroes, Legends, and now it's up to us as Legends to blah 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 blah." So that too was sort of like
Mm.
connection to that. Plus, they make a hell of a lot of reference to Crisis on Infinite Earths and the multiverse. You're not supposed to use that word post crisis. I was really surprised at
Well,
the
yeah,
lack of
yeah,
crisis terminology.
yeah, especially given Harbinger's role in this, and the history of the DC universe that you mentioned earlier, and yeah, that's really interesting that they're using that aspect
Yeah.
of pre-crisis history.
I mean, I guess if it comes from her, that's fine. And I guess if it comes from the Guardians, that's fine too. But even some of the other heroes have made reference of like I think Batman made reference of it, or someone did. A few other characters did. So, but we have to remember, all right, this is 1987. We're not that far away from the crisis yet,
Hmm.
and we don't, although the DC universe has moved on, the way we talk about the crisis is not exactly how they talked about the crisis just yet.
Right.
Just yet. They're still going to live in it, because it was only a year prior to this, or a year and a half, or whatever, So the other thing, to go back to the whole Nancy Reagan thing, the other thing I liked about this Millennium issues, you know, um, you start to see the weaknesses of it in issues 2 and 3 almost immediately because they are looking at it as this larger story. There's a lot of events that have to be talked about, but that aren't seen.
Hmm.
So anything that gets any kind of coverage in the tie-in books, they have to mention. But I said this about issue 1. The very first chapter of issue 1 talks about it's something like it's another day in the DC universe. And it talks about, this thing happens, this things happen, people are in love, blah, 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 blah. I'm starting to see that whether it's, for lack of a better word, perfect or not, it because the subplot is about gathering this chosen and it's about the future of Earth and how Earth is going to be the next race to spawn immortals. It's about the people more than it is the heroes.
Hmm.
Because all of their adventures happen in their tie-in books, but what happens in these issues are let's go gather the chosen or the reactions of the chosen to their families, to their countries, to their loyalties. When I said mentioning about Reagan, it's completely 80s because we got apartheid, we have communist China, you have things in the Middle East, you're talking about homosexuality and someone
Mm.
committing suicide because they feel out of place, right? Um, these are all hot button issues for the 80s. And it makes me think of this book as it feels a little bit more of like commentary, even to the point that in the beginning of issue 3, where we have this huge mass manhunter meeting. Anytime they have a meeting, they're shouting slogans. Like I love the slogans on in issue 3, like right at the top. You know, no man escapes the manhunters. No world escapes the manhunters. Our foes fear the face of steel. Our foes die. The chosen ones must die. No man escapes the manhunters. We are everywhere. Make America great again.
Oh my God.
It's a cult, right? Like that. That's what they're saying, right? And some of the words that the Grandmasters are saying in issue 3, um, most of the heroes of Earth have rejected our subversion as expected. Those that have not will revel in the luxury of pure power. The heroes, the men and women of influence, all those who love the lion will win.
Oh
We
boy.
heard that word, right? I was like, okay, I know that's not what Steve Englehart is doing. I know that's. I mean, any cult is a cult, right?
Right.
But boy, you know, when I look at it now, and I was like, got a little like, oh
Yeah.
boy, where are
How
those red
is
hats?
yeah, how prescient or
Yeah,
maybe, Engelhart is a student of history, and it's cyclical.
sure.
I had not picked up on that. That's an amazing observation.
Yeah, and that's total hindsight. I'm not trying to lay anything too crazy at Steve Englehart's uh, you know feet. So yeah, so it's got a lot of weaknesses to it structurally. Reading it now, these two issues, the Gathering of the Chosen. First, it's by the Guardian and the Zamaron. Then it's about the heroes, and they get involved with Gathering the Chosen. And um, the parts that I remembered liking about Millennium in a recent reread that I did within the past 10 years hasn't happened just yet. So these two issues spin wheels a little bit, I think. Um, so comparatively, as I have been doing to Legends, it kind of tracks the same as Legends, whereas like the
Yeah.
first couple issues were like, okay, and then you're like, where's it going? But at least
Yeah.
Legends had decent artwork to fawn over. So I think that's why it gets a little bit more of a nod. But there are some things coming up that I'm excited to read again to see if it still holds. So we'll see. We'll see.
I can't
Oh,
recall if I mentioned this as we're recording, because I mentioned it before we started recording to Peter,
right.
but coming at this, reading Millennium again for the second time since it was first published, I'm not enjoying this.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you said, with Legends, at least, there's some nice John Byrne art to look at.
Right. Right. And plus, if we were reading the tie-ins, would that have made a difference?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's a lot of information we're
Well,
missing.
yeah. If reading the Legion tie-in,
Yeah.
I don't know how the other ones were, how they hold up. So I don't remember specific ones. I remember the reveal of Lana Lang in Superman.
Hmm.
Um, that is about it, as
Yeah.
I can recall. So
There's a pretty good crossover. I think it happens a little bit later between Captain Atom, Detective Comics, Firestorm, and Suicide Squad, and all the
oh,
covers connect because they're all convening on like a Manhunter base in Swamp Thing's swamp.
hmm,
Like, and that story that I actually liked that a little bit. It was almost like a crossover within a crossover.
mm-hmm.
It was kind of fun. You said you read Secret Origins 22 featuring the history of the Manhunters. Was there anything that
Yes.
came out of that?
Oh, okay, yeah, because there was a mention of Laurel Kent as not yet being fully activated, and we've talked a little bit
Mm,
about that. I think that there's some confusion there about her, what does that mean? Activated, fully activated. She slept for whatever, slept among humanity. She said. Um, so my question was, when did she become activated in the 31st century or 30th century? Um, because her dialogue suggests she's been active for centuries at the least, if not for a millennium. So there's just some disconnection there in terms of what Laurel Kent is about in Legion and also in the Millennium series and Manhunters in general, I think too. So
yeah,
when did Secret Origins number 22 come out in relation to this issue?
the same
Same
month.
month.
Yeah,
Okay, so that means Paul probably he probably polished his dialogue um, after this script for the
yeah,
Manhunter entry was was done. So I don't know.
yeah. An android known as Laurel Kent who does not yet seem to have been fully activated.
And well, maybe they're just playing coy because we've got a two-parter and they don't want to say too much about it. So
Sure, right. It looks like Secret Origins came out after issue 42. Oh no, the same week. I'm sorry. It came out the same week.
hmm, yeah, that makes sense then.
Yeah. Oh, right, because this is the month that had two issues of everything. So there was two issues of Legion of Superheroes. We already covered the first one that was released in early September. It had three issues of Millennium. It had two issues of Amethyst. So it was like this was a busy month for DC in terms of
Ah, okay.
yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what the other Millennium issues, if they mean anything or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my way to assign homework for Eric.
Yes.
And
Appreciate that.
thank you. You're welcome. And then let's touch on Amethyst number three of a four-issue miniseries. We're looking at this because of its uh, origin story for Mordru, classic Legionnaire villain. And we've covered issues 1 and 2 so far. And here we are, issues 3. Keith Giffen, Mindy Newell. Script by Mindy Newell. Art by Esteban Maroto. Lettering John Costanza. Coloring Tatiana Wood. And edited by Karen Berger. Basically, this issue is continuing the confrontation between Amethyst, who is a Lord of Order at this point in the DC universe, against the Lords of Chaos. They want Gem World for themselves, and she stands in the way. And also there's a lot of talk about sacrifice and there's two DC loves putting two brothers against each other. One of them is Mordru, one of them is trying to fight for his family, although he's way out of his league. And there's a battle and a battle and a more battle. If you know the characters of Flaw and Child from Young Justice, this is not the first time we've seen them in comics, but those are the same characters, more or less. It ends with the kind of it ends with a lot of death. And Mordru will forever be Mordru. He will not revert back to his previous self. And Amethyst has a plan that we don't know just yet. She's going to do something by the end of the issue. So there's your very haphazard synopsis.
Yeah, that whole aspect of Mordru, who Mordru is at this point, because up to now, he was Rin, brother of Donal,
One of the sons of Topaz.
and the way up to this issue, the way that this has been portrayed is that through either innate character flaws, I'll just say at this point, or the influence, or maybe both, the influence of the Lords of Chaos, he starts to transform into uh, almost an alternate self, like another personality type thing, i.e., Mordru. But in this issue, it appears like Mordru and Rin are two different characters inhabiting the same body. Whether that's actually two facets of the same person or not, I'm not. That's not made clear to me. But what does happen for sure is that Rin is no longer,
Yeah. Yeah.
and as you said, Mordru is now that character
Right.
in the DC universe.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, but also contributed to the confusion about what this personality situation is.
Right. And Amethyst even said that in last issue, where she said, she kept referring to him as Rin, and that he should be able to fight it off, or that he doesn't have to go this route.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, in the first issue, they talk about molding him physically through violence into this thing. But I also like on page 18 when he kills his brother, which is such a classic moment of villainy, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to Star Wars: The Force Awakens. um, the shot of him killing his brother, and behind him is one of the Lords of Chaos. Whether it's working through him, whether it's giving him the power, like that's it. That's sort of like, the soul tried to escape in the previous issue or previous page, and maybe it's because the soul departed that the Lords of Chaos could move in completely or whatever. But
Mm.
whatever,
Well,
it feels like
and
that's the moment.
yeah, and that means it's Amethyst's fault because she does the spell and let the light free thy captive soul.
Hmm.
And Rin is like, freedom.
But then the soul says, kill him, grant thy brother true freedom, and he couldn't do it. His father says, no, don't. My sons, your brothers. Father, death is the only way. They lost their chance, basically, to try
Mm-hmm.
to free the soul. And the soul's probably in damnation forever and ever. Amen.
or
She's,
or just destroyed.
or destroyed. Yeah. Yeah. I wrote in my notes here, it's so interesting that they decided to go with this story. It's got connections to Legion of Superheroes. That's why we're reading it. It's a further exploration of what I think is Keith Giffen's idea of tying Amethyst into Lords of Order and Lords of Chaos from the previous series, even spawning all the way back to Crisis. Because there's
Mm-hmm.
a scene with Amethyst and Dr. Fate looks in her eyes and he's like, oh my God, because he is a Lord of Order. It's a vehicle for Esteban Morodo, which ultimately I think is the point. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
we got Esteban Morodo. Let's give him Amethyst. Mindy Newell's going to overwrite a million words over all the artwork.
Oh
That's
my
fine.
God. Yes.
It sort of makes sense. I can see she's trying to go with this like sort of classic fantasy something, to give it a little bit a tonal shift from even the very first Amethyst Maxi series, for the 12 issues, was very dramatic, had moments of high drama, but was also ultimately a girl's fantasy book, right? On some level too. I even make reference the way Topaz is in this book, the way he's Lord Topaz. He's crying. He's don't kill my sons. He was also very dramatic in that first. He was almost like his son, Donald. He was very
Mm.
much like him, wanting to fight, wanting to whatever, but he really has no experience, right? So, but there are moments of horror, and there's moments of Ernie Cologne artwork, like showing violence and people die and there's blood. Then the second volume of Amethyst, the series, got cutesier. It got a little girlier. It got
Mm,
the artwork was a little more cartoony, if you want to say. And then we get this, which is like a complete change tonally. And I wrote here, I said, it's interesting. It's almost like they killed the franchise because, like, where do you go from here?
yeah.
And they don't use this character again until like some random story in the 90s. And then a little bit in Legion of Superheroes, but then not until she got revamped for the New 52.
Hmm.
Um, so it's interesting. It's like they're almost like we want to make this slightly. We want to do what Marvel did in Marvel magazines a little bit in their black and white magazines, and like kind of make this adult fantasy thing tied into the DC universe. And but we get to build on the Mordru mythos, because he doesn't have an origin. He's such a mysterious character. And we're gonna see if people pick it up.
But with dialogue like this, and this is my big complaint with this issue in particular, but also as we've been reading the front half of this is uh this is page 19 with Amber,
Mm-hmm.
the little sister. Donnie? Donnie's dead? You killed him. My daddy's gonna get you, mommy. I want my mommy. I mean, oh, come on. And then this issue is filled with dialogue like that, or the child's constant references to pop culture of the 80s, it just throws me out of this whole thing, Peter. The only redeeming thing about this is is the Morodo art
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
I and why, we have this story going on here with Amethyst about Mordru, and yet there's no companion story in the Legion title involving that character. It seems like a wasted opportunity
Mm.
of some sort.
I think it's because it's Giffin's idea, and he's not writing the Legion. Because when he does write the Legion, it does come into play,
Mm,
which we'll see eventually.
yeah,
So I
I
think
just,
it's
but just in terms of synergy, we have a Millennium crossover tying into that. Why not tie? I mean, that's too much. It's too much. You can't
yeah,
have Millennium and Mordru going
yeah,
on at the same time. But still, it's just like weird timing, I guess.
yeah. Plus, this story is supposed to take place like later, but Gem World time is different than Earth time, and so yeah, I think it's also there's not a lot of people that can do the Lords of Order and Lords of Chaos. Like Keith Giffen was one, maybe an editor, but there was that Phantom Stranger miniseries, and that was Paul Kupperberg. So I think there might be something in issue 4. I can't remember, but we will see this referenced in our volume of Legion, but not for a while.
Mm, okay.
Yeah. I want to make mention of page 8 and 9, where Child is basically recounting the previous volumes of Amethyst.
Hmm.
Morodo doing riffs of this is all based on Ernie Cologne art, like the shot of Dark Opal, the dog, her parents, Amethyst looking at a younger Emmy. Like this is all riffs of Ernie Cologne artwork, and it's beautiful. Like I look at
Hmm.
it and I'm like, oh my God. And it's so sad to hear what became of her dog Taffy. Because Child is such a jerk. And he's like, poor Taffy became an old dumb dog and had to be put to sleep. It's like, no, not Taffy. She was great. So I love those pages. And the shot of Mordru kneeling on page 22, it's not, but I look at it and I go, that kind of looks like our version of Mordru with all the energy and his hair wild. And
Yeah.
there are certain images of Mordru that because he wears those wings on his head and he's got the full beard as an old man, and yeah, it's not a direct. I don't think Morodo is looking at other artwork, but I looked at it and was like, oh,
Yeah.
I like that.
I see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see it. Yeah. Speaking of this scene, this was something else that I thought was interesting for the character because he has killed Rin and his brother
Hmm.
in the previous pages. I mean, at least it's implied he's killed Rin. Yeah, that's the storytelling on that sequence is not perhaps the best. But then here on this page, he says, "Amethyst, what will become of me? I killed my brother." I thought the whole point of Mordru transforming into a Lord of Chaos was he, you know, he basically is evil. And yet here is this remorsefulness. What is going on with that? That was the only thing besides the art in this issue where I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting."
And what she says, power is a cruel joke. Even the gods can be made its pawn, and we all must live with the sins and we commit in its name. Because he was sort of, when they reshaped him and he had his first battle with Amethyst and it didn't go so well, and then he basically retreats, thinks that, and then he says to the Lords of Chaos, oh, go ahead and do what you're going to do. I've weakened her, blah. And they're like, no, you didn't, dude. No, you didn't. You barely scratched the surface, right? And then in these pages too, he's like, we're here at their seat of power because they've changed Topaz Castle and they've killed and he's a little too overeager to become a villain, it's like, I'm Mordru, I'm Mordru. And then he's like, realize, oh shit, I'm going to be Mordru forever.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? So it's a great little moment, but I don't remember what the last issue is. I don't because I feel like in some ways, in more modern telling or other story, this would be the last issue.
Mm,
We did everything. What's
yeah,
next?
yeah,
So it's like
yeah.
I don't
I had the
remember.
same thought, especially the way it ends on that last page. It's like two monks to two clergymen. I'm not sure exactly what they are.
Oh, right, Diamond Priests. Yeah,
Okay. It's time for Vespers, my brother. Come. And what is it I should pray for, brother? Salvation? Tis too late for that. Then understanding, perhaps, for forgiveness, courage. I that she may grant. Okay. What?
yeah, and he's the son of the major villain of the very first Maxi series.
Oh, okay. Though that makes more sense.
Right. But he's now a priest, so he's like, yeah. So if you know who the character is, Carnelian, you're like, oh, it's that guy. Plus, he
Mm.
also was adopted from Earth,
Oh,
so
okay.
he was on the villain side as opposed to Amethyst.
Oh, so the mirror image. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes,
And
yes, yes.
and okay, and then couple that with the page before
Mm-hmm.
with the father. Is this the way of order then, Amethyst? To show no pity, to cry no tears, to leave death in thy wake. Thou art no better than chaos.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some of the philosophical stuff I do appreciate here.
Plus, she says it at the end, right? What I do next, I do because I must. All I ask of Gemworld is to show faith and courage,
Oh, okay, yes, of
and that's a
course.
connection. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like, well, I mean, even Fate, like the most recent, well, in the 80s, the Fate miniseries, Dr. Fate miniseries that I think it was Giffen and DeMatteis, and like they also, Nabu also is confronted with like, you're Lord of Order, but you act like a maniac, like
Hmm.
so that, are they really two sides of a coin or are they just basically the same thing,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that Giffen doesn't write this even though he's not drawing it. So it's like, why do you need Mindy Newell? Because Giffen's not a bad scripter,
Mm-mm.
unless he's still sort of new in his game at this point, as a writer. He's not really fleshed out yet, but
Or
uh,
was he working on something else that he couldn't devote his full attention to this?
maybe, yeah. I just wonder what the dialogue might have been like,
Oh,
or they might have said, it is Amethyst. We need a female,
ah,
female writer. Maybe they wanted that as well.
yeah, and I don't want to leave listeners with the the impression that I hate everything that Mindy Newell is writing on the page. It's just some stuff just is clunky and doesn't ring true at times. But other bits of it, when they're doing when she's doing like kind of like the what I refer to myself as high fantasy
Right.
language, it's fine.
Yeah, see, Giffen is more listed as a plotter,
Mm-hmm.
especially during the Legion of Superheroes stuff. Certainly the Omega Man, well, Ambush Bug. He's an idea man. He is listed as writer for Justice League #1, but then it's plotter, 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 plotter. So it's like, yeah, that's his thing. But the way he plots is he does those thumbnails a lot of
Mm.
times. So, um,
Do you think he did that on this?
hard to say.
Yeah.
The in issue 1, when they do that tour through Gem World and you see all the 12 different houses, that feels very Giffen to me.
Okay.
It feels very like what I know from like 5 years later and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't know if well, maybe he did and he just said don't follow it, but this is
Mm-hmm.
sort of what I want. Okay, we'll wrap it up next time around, and I think that wraps up this episode as well.
I
Yeah.
think it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Really great to be back again on an issue that we enjoyed. We'll see what that means for issue 43 when we come back.
It's good to be back. This has been a while, both for us getting back together to talk about Legion, uh, since our last regular issue. It feels like a long time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very excited that we're getting back to our regularly scheduled programming,
Right.
as it were. So, and like I said, this issue was a delight, and so I'm looking forward to reading the next one. And we're getting close to where I rejoined reading Legion on a monthly basis. So
Nice.
I'll get to revisit those issues after all these years and see how they hold up as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, barring any something that I'm forgetting, we may do a pretty straight shot to issue. We could do, I should say, a straight shot to 50 from here.
Oh wow!
But we get sidetracked every now and then, so we'll see. I mean, we have some pretty important things coming up. Issue 45, which is an anniversary issue,
Mm-hmm.
and then the build up to issue 50,
Mm-hmm.
which is a story unto itself. And then, we have things along the way, like we said, the Wanderer series is coming up.
More Who's Who, right?
Yeah, more Who's Who. The second Who's Who 87, plus whatever we decide to do with the Legion Who's Who.
Oh right.
And then I know we have a couple of like short stories, 1 or 2 short stories in Secret Origins, which will be fun. Other than that, like we probably could go all the way up to 50, like I said, unless we're like, hey, let's do a Tales just for the heck of it.
Mm-hmm.
So should be fun. Should be fun.
Yes.
And then after that, we only have 13 more, 13, 14 more, maybe an annual or two. Like we're gonna be done soon, Eric.
Oh,
Crazy.
I don't like that idea, Peter.
So stay with us, and if you have any feedback, you can reach me at peter@thedailyreels.com or
longboxreview@gmail.com.
all right, thanks for joining us for this episode. We'll see you again next time around, and as always, long live the Legion
Project
Podcast.
Podcast.
See ya.
Bye bye.